I don't know what to do. Thomas was taken 3 days ago, and I haven't been able to leave the house since. I was still sitting at the kitchen table when Kara, my wife, got up. I was staring off into nothing, remembering how the little boy scarecrow had come up from the ground in the furrow I had dug as I looked for Thomas. She had shaken me, asking what was wrong, but I couldn't tell her much of anything. I was in a state of shock, not really sure how to explain what had happened. She became even more frantic when she couldn't find Thomas, and the talking had become shouting. She was getting scared. Even in my current state, I could tell, and that's why she called the police. Sheriff Dunlin came when she called, having just gotten out of bed when the operator called to tell him about my son. I smelled him before I saw him as he came to the porch. He walked into the kitchen, my wife making him leave his cigarette in the yard, and he sat down next to me at the table as I just stared out into space. "Morning, Dale," he said, and it seemed that his words were the magic spell I'd been looking for to bring me out of my stupor. "Morning, Sheriff," I answered quietly. "I'm sorry to come out under such terrible circumstances, but we need to know where your boy is." I just told him that he was missing. I told him that he had run into the field suddenly, as I was perched in the barn, and became lost in the field. I told him that I had searched and searched, but I couldn't find him. I told him that I must have gotten turned around out in the field and had a nervous breakdown or something, like the one I'd had in the war. I had woken up just now, sitting at the table, with no clue how I had gotten there. I told him a load of bullcrap, and he asked my wife if he could make some calls from the house phone. An hour later, our dirt yard was full of state police cars, and the property was being searched thoroughly. They tromped through the fields, not looking twice at the scarecrows as they searched. They searched the barn, the sheds, the pond, the house, and everything in between. They asked about the dug-up area in the field, but I only shook my head. No answer I could give them would have been satisfactory. In the end, they told me they would put up his poster and asked if we had a recent photo of him. Kara provided one, and he said they would have the poster up by tomorrow. Then, all of them packed up in their cars and left. As they drove away, I suddenly wished I'd been more honest with him about what I'd seen. They might have thought me mad, but maybe they would have taken me with them instead of leaving me here where the whispers had already started again. It was afternoon by the time they left. Brad wanted to check the crops, but I just couldn't summon up the desire. I found myself sitting on the porch instead, looking at the crops, much the way Thomas had been doing yesterday. I watched the corn sway in the autumn breeze, heard the rattle of corn husks and discarded silk as they were pushed, and felt a hollowness inside myself. How does one cope after seeing the ground swallow up their child? I doubt I was the first to ask this question, but I just didn't know how to handle it. Thomas was gone, never coming back, and I was left behind. I jumped when my wife sat down next to me, realizing that it was dark now. I'd been sitting on the porch for what must have been hours, watching the corn sway and listening to the voices that swayed with it. They promised so many things. Promised peace in the field, peace amongst the corn, and it was all I could do not to rush out to the field and lose myself in that green sea. She threw a blanket over us and nestled against me as she joined me in my endless staring. "What happened to him, Dale? What happened to Thomas?" I couldn't answer her. I would never answer her. The things I had seen couldn't be vocalized. To speak of it would make it real, and if it were real, then it could happen again. Better that he drowned in the pond, better that he had been murdered. To have my own farm simply devour him would be unthinkable. "Come on, Dale, please talk to me." She was pleading now, begging me for something that I couldn't give her. All I could do was sit there and hold that terrible knowledge inside myself. We sat in silence for nearly an hour before she kissed my cheek, and said she was going to bed. As I sat on the porch, watching the corn sway, I heard that same skeletal voice as it moved with the wind. It told me how I could find peace amongst the crops, that all my cares would disappear once I was one with the land again. When I tell you that it took everything I had not to run out into the field, I mean it. I was sitting under the blanket, all my will used to keep me rooted to that spot, when the farm played its ace. The corn rustled, and out walked Thomas. I sat forward, shocked, watching my son come stumbling out of the corn. He waved at me, a childish flop of his arm, and enticed me to join him. The corn waved in the breeze, its long arms seeming to lure me into its earthly embrace. They wanted me to be with them, to be a part of them, and as I rose from the swing, that was what I fully intended to do. It wasn't until the moon hit Thomas just right that I saw the truth. It was nothing but the scarecrow, the one I had seen pop from the ground like one of my ears of corn, waving in the breeze. I didn't know how he had come to be at the edge of the cornfield, a full 50 feet from where I had seen him sprout. But there he was. His thin arms no longer waved so much as they were moved by the breeze. I got up and went inside, turning my back on that waving scarecrow. I thought maybe I could sleep, but there would be no sleep for me that night. I was constantly pulled from it by a tapping at the bedroom window. When I would look up, I would see the ghostly face of my son, his eyes begging as he rapped on the glass. I would roll over, turning away from my little boy, and put my head under the pillow as he begged me to come with him. He would say anything to get me out of bed. He would say anything to get me out of the safety of my house. "Daddy, it's so cold. Won't you come let me in? Daddy, I'm scared. Come outside. Please come outside, Daddy. It's nice in the field. You'll like it. The green man is coming, Daddy. He's gonna get you either way. The scarecrows told me so. Daddy, 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 Daddy!" On and on and on and on. The following day, I was like a ghost in my own house. My wife brought me breakfast in bed, Brad hovering by the door as he asked if I was going to be okay. Kara told him that I was fine, but she didn't seem to be so sure herself. She sat with me as I ate, clearly wanting to ask me something, but unable to form the words she wished to ask. When I was done eating, I just stared at the tray until she picked it up. She was looking at me with real worry, and when she turned to go, she stopped suddenly, tray in hand. "I know you saw something out there. Something that scared you. You need to talk about it, Dale. Just tell me what you saw. Maybe I can help." I looked at her, and she must have seen something in my eyes that was more alarming than the way I was acting. "You can't help me, Kara, and I can't help you. We're trapped here by those things, by the land, and there's no help for us." She left then, but I was never really alone. Whenever the wind blew, I could still hear Thomas as he begged me to come to the field. I lived in that stupor for 2 days, refusing to leave the house, refusing to speak to anyone. Brad and Kara were worried, coming to talk to me or try to get me to eat. I just sat there, though, staring out the window, the wind rustling the corn and the scarecrows as they moved in closer. They didn't think I could see them as they gathered, but I could. They never left the safety of the corn, but I could see their faces as they congregated. They stared at me. They stared through me, and the voices on the wind told me how I would join their legion soon. When I suddenly noticed Greg, a white moon face at the foot of my bed, I jumped. It had been morning only a moment before, but the shadows told me that it must be midday. He was kneeling, just looking at me, and and I stared back at him for a few minutes before a creepy smile stretched over his still childish face. I blinked. Had his eyes always been so jaundice? So piss yellow? "They're calling you," he said, almost lilting, and I glanced back at the window as the sun seemed to darken before my very eyes. The window was obscured by a rogues gallery of squashed sackcloth faces. When I turned back to the foot of the bed, Greg was gone. When I looked back out the window, the scarecrows were gone. I sat up that night, staring into the darkness as my wife snored comfortably beside me. The wind still swirled around the house, a real late-season gale, and I heard the house creaking and the corn rustling. As the wind whipped, I heard the voices of the field, Thomas's voice amongst them, as it called me to come back to the land. They whistled and cajoled and begged, and over time, they wore me down. As my wife slept, I felt tears run down my face. Thomas, my boy, had been taken by the land. He was all alone out there, and here I sat refusing him. He was nestled in the earth, and I was sitting here denying him my company, my love. A knocking at the window tore my head back towards it, and there he was. He was pale in the moonlight. My Thomas. His cherubic face was unaccusing, untempered by anger, graced only by confusion. His shirt was stained with dirt, the same dirt that had taken him, but he was pristine. He was unharmed, and he stared at me questioningly. "Daddy, please come back to me. I'm so lonely here." So now, I'm sitting at the kitchen table, writing my final explanation to my wife and boys. I started writing this down so it would be fresh, but I think it's also in case something happens to me. You see, the voices are always in my head now. I can hear them as I sit at the table writing. They follow me, toy with me, and tell me how nice it will be to be a part of his crop. Who is he? I don't know, but his words, the scarecrow's words, are becoming more and more tantalizing. I've laid in bed and listened for 3 days. I won't spend another day with this chorus in my brain. When I'm done, I think I'll take off my shoes and just walk out into the fields. It will be nice to feel the soil beneath my toes one last time. I can see that little scarecrow from the kitchen table. It's almost like he's waving to me, calling me over, telling me to return to the land. Thomas is with them, waving and calling to me too. I think I can see Greg out there with them. It's dark, and the porch light is off, but it seems like he's calling me there too. I think it's time for me to go. I never could say no to my boys. Good evening, my little creeperonis. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. I hope you're enjoying the Towesey Homestead series. Just 5 more days left till Halloween and the dramatic conclusion of our series. But for now, it's time to thank our patrons. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks, Leslie. We just couldn't do it without you. If you too would like to join Leslie and be one of our Spooky Skeletons, you too can come on down to Patreon. For just $5 a month, you can have your name read out at the end of each one of my YouTube and TikTok videos. So, come on down and join our skeletal army. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Don't forget to come back tomorrow night for part 4, and have a wonderful evening.